The summer sun hung low over the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, painting the wheat fields in shades of burnished gold. In the small village of Lower Edgecombe, everything looked peaceful from the outside. Thatched roofs, dry stone walls, roses climbing every cottage door. But inside the modest stone house at the end of Church Lane, the air felt heavy with unspoken grief. 22-year-old Ethan Harper sat motionless on the worn leather sofa, staring at the cold cup of tea his mother-in-law had placed in front of him an hour earlier. His eyes were red-rimmed, his dark hair disheveled. Only 3 days ago his wife, Lily, had packed a single suitcase, left a brief note on the kitchen table, "I am sorry. I can't do this anymore," and driven off with a wealthy property developer from Cheltenham she would met online. She was 19, beautiful, restless, and now gone. The front door opened softly. Sarah Bennett, Lily's mother, stepped inside carrying 2 canvas shopping bags from the village co-op. At 41, Sarah still turned heads when she walked down the high street. Her auburn hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, her skin smooth and lightly freckled from years of gardening, her figure trim and graceful despite the quiet hardships of the last few years. She had divorced Lily's father, a charming but chronically unemployed drinker, when Lily was 15. Since then, she had raised 2 daughters alone, first as a nursery school teacher, then as the manager of a small garden center on the outskirts of Cirencester. "Ethan, love," she said gently, setting the bags on the counter. "You have not touched your tea." He lifted his head, managing a weak smile that did not reach his eyes. "Sorry, Sarah. I keep thinking she will walk back through the door." Sarah crossed the room and sat beside him, not too close, but close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender from her shampoo. "She is not coming back, sweetheart. Not this time." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know. I just do not know what I am supposed to do now." Sarah rested a hand lightly on his forearm. Her touch was warm, steady. "For starters, you're not going back to that damp flat above the garage in Tetbury. It is too far for you to commute to the welding shop every day, and you should not be on your own right now. Stay here. There is plenty of room." He looked at her, surprised. "You sure? I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. You are family." She gave his arm a small squeeze before standing up. "Besides, the house has felt too quiet since Lily left for good. Having you around will be nice." Ethan stayed. The first week was awkward. He kept to himself, rising early to leave for the fabrication workshop in Stroud before Sarah was awake, returning late when the sky was already darkening. Sarah, sensing his need for space, did not push. She simply made sure there was always a hot meal waiting when he walked through the door: lamb hot pot, shepherd's pie, chicken casserole fragrant with rosemary from the garden. She asked about his day in a soft voice, never prying too deeply. Slowly the routine settled. Ethan began to linger at the breakfast table. Sarah started leaving the radio on while she prepared supper, humming along to old Fleetwood Mac songs. One evening, she poured them each a glass of red wine after dinner, and they sat in the tiny conservatory, watching the last light fade behind the beech trees. "You are doing better," she observed quietly. He gave a small shrug. "I still feel like someone punched a hole through my chest." "I know." Sarah looked down at her glass. "When David walked out on me, I felt the same. Like the ground had vanished under my feet. It takes time." Ethan studied her profile in the dim light. She looked younger than her years tonight, the soft glow from the fairy lights she would strung along the beams catching the green of her eyes. For the first time since Lily left, something other than pain stirred inside him, something warm, curious, dangerous. One Saturday morning, he came downstairs to find Sarah standing on a stepladder in the hallway, trying to change a light bulb in the high ceiling fixture. She was wearing faded denim shorts and a loose white t-shirt that rode up slightly as she stretched. Careful, Ethan started, but she wobbled. Instinctively, he stepped forward, hands going to her waist to steady her. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Sarah's breath caught. "Thank you," she murmured. He did not let go immediately. His palms felt the warmth of her skin through the thin cotton. She smelled of sun-warmed cotton and the mint she had been picking in the herb garden. When he finally released her, his fingers tingled. "Sorry," he said, voice rough. "Do not be." She smiled a small, almost shy smile and stepped down. "I have been meaning to ask you to fix that lock on the garden shed anyway. The latch keeps sticking." That afternoon they worked side by side in the shed. Ethan oiled the hinges, while Sarah sorted through seed packets. The space was small. Every time they passed each other, their arms brushed. Neither of them commented on it. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Sarah brought out 2 cold bottles of cider. They sat on the old wooden bench under the apple tree. A breeze lifted strands of her hair across her cheek. Ethan reached out without thinking and tucked them behind her ear. She did not pull away. "You have got a bit of oil on your face," he said by way of explanation, though they both knew it was a lie. Her lips curved. "Do I?" He nodded, thumb lingering just a fraction too long against her cheekbone. The air between them thickened. That night Ethan lay awake in the guest bedroom, listening to the house settle. He could hear the faint creak of floorboards from Sarah's room down the hall. He told himself it was nothing, just kindness, just comfort between 2 people who had both been abandoned. But the memory of her skin beneath his hands kept returning, vivid and insistent. Across the landing, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, fingers pressed to the place he had touched. She felt 20 years younger and utterly terrified. Neither of them slept much. The following week the weather turned hot, an unusual late August heat wave that turned the Cotswold air golden and drowsy. Ethan started coming home earlier. Sarah began wearing lighter dresses, sleeveless cotton ones that skimmed her thighs when she moved. Once, while hanging washing on the line, a gust lifted the hem and Ethan, carrying a toolbox past the garden gate, caught a glimpse of pale lace against sun-kissed skin. He turned away quickly, heart hammering. They did not speak about it, but the glances grew longer. The casual touches her hand on his shoulder as she passed behind him at the sink, his fingers brushing hers when he handed her a mug, became deliberate. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. One evening after a long day at the workshop, Ethan found Sarah in the kitchen, making elderflower cordial. She was barefoot, hair piled loosely on top of her head, a few damp curls clinging to her neck from the steam. A thin cotton sundress clung slightly where she had splashed water on herself. She looked up and smiled. "You are early. Finished the job ahead of schedule." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She stirred the pot, then turned to face him fully. "You look tired." "I am all right." She stepped closer slowly, giving him time to move away if he wanted to. He did not. Sarah lifted a hand and brushed a streak of soot from his cheek. "You have got engine grease on you again." "Have I?" "MMM." Her thumb lingered, tracing the line of his jaw. "You should take a shower." Their eyes locked. Ethan's voice came out low. "Maybe I should." Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Sarah whispered, "The bathroom's free." He swallowed. "Right." But instead of stepping back, he leaned in just a fraction. Sarah's breath hitched. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Then the kettle clicked off, breaking the spell. Sarah laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. "Tea." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, tea." They both knew they had just stepped right up to the edge of something irreversible. And neither of them was entirely sure they wanted to step back. The heat wave lingered into September, turning the Cotswolds into a languid, honey-colored dream. Mornings started with mist rising from the valleys, afternoons shimmered with heat, and evenings carried the heavy scent of late roses and cut grass. Inside the stone cottage on Church Lane, the atmosphere had thickened into something far more dangerous than summer air. Ethan and Sarah moved around each other, like people orbiting a shared flame, careful, aware, drawn inexorably closer. The small touches that had once been accidental were now deliberate, her fingers lingering on his wrist when she passed him a plate, his hand brushing the small of her back as he reached over her to close a cupboard. Every contact sent a quiet jolt through them both. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah asked Ethan to help her move an old oak dresser in the spare bedroom. The room had belonged to Lily once. Now it stood half empty, the walls still papered in the pale lavender her daughter had chosen at 16. They pushed the heavy piece of furniture together, shoulders touching, breathing hard from the effort. When the dresser finally settled into place against the opposite wall, Sarah straightened up and wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "God, it is boiling in here," she said, laughing breathlessly. Ethan looked at her. Sweat had darkened the neckline of her thin cotton camisole. A single bead traced a slow path down the hollow of her throat. He felt his mouth go dry. "Yeah, he managed." Stifling, she caught the way he was looking at her. Instead of turning away, she held his gaze. Slowly, she reached up and gathered her hair off her neck, twisting it into a loose knot. The movement lifted her breasts against the damp fabric. Ethan's breath caught audibly. Sarah let her arms fall. "You're staring, Ethan." "Can't help it," he said, voice low and rough. "You are beautiful." The words hung between them. Sarah took one step forward, then another. She stopped close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "I am old enough to be your mother," she whispered, though the words sounded more like a dare than a warning. "You are not my mother." His eyes never left hers. "And you are not old." A long silence. Somewhere outside, a blackbird sang, sharp and sweet. Sarah lifted a hand and rested it lightly against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it hammering beneath her palm. "Tell me to stop," she said softly. Ethan covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against him. "I do not want you to stop." That was all it took. She rose on her toes. He bent his head. Their mouths met, tentative at first, almost polite, then hungry. Sarah made a small, surprised sound against his lips. Ethan's arms went around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, tongues touching, hands roaming. He backed her gently against the dresser until she was sitting on the edge, legs parting to let him stand between them. They kissed like people who had been starving. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sarah's cheeks were flushed, her lips swollen. She looked dazed, exhilarated, a little afraid. Upstairs, she whispered. Ethan nodded once. They did not speak again until they reached her bedroom. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, filling the room with soft, amber light. The bed was neatly made with white linen and a faded floral quilt. Sarah paused beside it, suddenly uncertain. Ethan stepped behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and kissed the side of her neck. "You sure?" he murmured against her skin. She turned in his arms. "I have never been more sure of anything." They undressed each other slowly, reverently. Ethan peeled her camisole over her head, kissed the freckles scattered across her collarbone. Sarah unbuttoned his shirt with trembling fingers, traced the lean muscles of his stomach, the faint scar from a childhood accident along his ribs. When they were both bare, they stood for a moment, simply looking, marveling, memorizing. Sarah was softer, more curved than the girls his own age. Her breasts were full, nipples dusky rose. Her hips flared gently. Faint silver stretch marks shimmered on her lower belly, like delicate lightning. To Ethan, she was perfect. He thought she was exquisite. They fell onto the bed in a tangle of limbs and quiet laughter. Hands explored, mouths followed. Sarah arched when Ethan kissed his way down her body, gasped when his tongue found her. She came with a soft cry, fingers knotted in his hair, thighs trembling around his head. Afterward, she pulled him up, kissed the taste of herself from his lips, then guided him inside her. They moved together slowly at first, learning each other's rhythms. Then faster, deeper, more desperate. Sarah's nails scored lightly down his back. Ethan buried his face against her neck, breathing her name like a prayer. When he felt her tighten around him again, he let go, spilling inside her with a low groan that sounded almost like pain. They stayed joined for a long time afterward, hearts slowing together, sweat cooling on their skin. Sarah spoke first, voice soft in the quiet room. That was... Yeah, Ethan finished for her. He kissed her temple. Yeah. She curled against his side, head on his chest. We should not have done that. I know. But I do not regret it. Neither do I. They lay in silence for a while, listening to each other breathe. Then Sarah said, Lily's gone. She chose her path. We are allowed to choose ours. Ethan tightened his arm around her. I do not want this to be just once. Sarah lifted her head, looked into his eyes. It won't be. From that afternoon, everything changed. They no longer pretended the touches were accidental. Sarah wore less around the house silk camisoles, soft robes that slipped off one shoulder when she leaned over the kitchen counter. Ethan stopped leaving early for work on weekends. Instead, he stayed in bed with her, making love in the pale morning light while birds sang outside. They cooked together, laughed together, watched old films curled under a blanket on the sofa. Every night they slept in the same bed, bodies entwined. Sarah woke sometimes in the small hours and simply watched him sleep young, strong, beautiful, and felt something close to awe. Ethan, in turn, found himself noticing small things about her. The way she hummed when she was happy, how she always tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the soft sigh she made when he kissed the spot just below her ear. They talked about everything and nothing. About the future, about fear, about what people would say if they ever found out. We will have to be careful, Sarah said one night, tracing circles on his chest. The village is small. Tongues wag. I do not care about the village, Ethan replied. I care about you. She smiled against his skin. Sweet boy. Not a boy anymore. No, she agreed softly. Definitely not. The days slipped by in a golden haze. But beneath the happiness lay a growing awareness that this could not last forever in Lower Edgecombe. Someone would notice the change in them, the way they looked at each other, the way Sarah's eyes followed Ethan across a room, the way he touched her elbow a fraction too long when helping her with her coat. One evening in late September, as they sat on the garden bench sharing a bottle of wine, Sarah said quietly, We can't stay here, can we? Ethan looked at the darkening sky. Not forever. Where would we go? He thought for a moment. London. Big enough to disappear in. Plenty of work for a welder. You could teach again or open that little plant shop you have always talked about. Sarah's eyes lit up. You have thought about this. I think about it every day. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Then let us do it. Let us start again. Just us. Ethan kissed the top of her head. Just us. They began to plan in whispers quiet conversations late at night, notes scribbled on scraps of paper, internet searches on Sarah's laptop when the rest of the village was asleep. Selling the house would give them enough to start over. A deposit on a flat in one of the quieter parts of the city, maybe Islington or Hackney, new names for everyday life, if necessary. A new life. But most of all, freedom. Freedom to love without looking over their shoulders. Freedom to be whoever they wanted to be. As autumn leaves began to turn, the cottage filled with the quiet excitement of people preparing to run towards something better. And every night, in the big bed upstairs, they reminded each other why they were willing to risk everything. The decision to leave Lower Edgecombe felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating, and strangely inevitable. By mid-October, the leaves had turned crimson and gold, carpeting the lanes in a final blaze of color before winter stripped everything bare. Inside the cottage, boxes lined the hallway, each one carefully labeled kitchen essentials, books, clothes, London winter. Sarah had found a buyer quickly, a young couple from Bristol, who wanted the house for weekends and holidays. The sale closed in 3 weeks. The money deposited into a joint account Ethan had quietly opened online. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. A deposit on a small 2-bedroom flat in Stoke Newington, North London, plus a cushion for the first few uncertain months. They told the village the simplest version of the truth. Sarah had been offered a teaching position at a private nursery in the city, and Ethan had secured steady contract work with a large construction firm in East London. No one questioned it. In a place where people had known each other for generations, sudden departures were rare but not unheard of. A few neighbors dropped off jars of homemade jam and small cards wishing them well. Mrs. Hargreaves from next door even teared up when she hugged Sarah goodbye. "You will come back for Christmas, won't you?" she asked. Sarah smiled gently. "We will see." The last night in the cottage they did not sleep. They made love slowly, almost ceremonially, on every surface that had witnessed their secret: the kitchen table, the conservatory sofa, finally the big bed upstairs. Afterward they lay tangled in the sheets, listening to the house breathe around them. "I am scared," Sarah admitted in the dark. Ethan kissed her forehead. "Me too. But we are doing this together." At dawn they loaded the last boxes into the hired van. Ethan drove. Sarah sat beside him, one hand resting on his thigh the entire way. They did not speak much. The motorway hummed beneath them, carrying them away from the quiet valleys toward the roar of the city. Stoke Newington welcomed them with indifferent bustle. Their new flat was on the 3rd floor of a red brick Victorian conversion, high ceilings, original fireplaces, tall sash windows that let in slanting autumn light. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. They spent the first weekend unpacking, hanging curtains, arranging books on shelves. Sarah bought a small olive tree for the living room corner and placed it where the morning sun would reach it. On their first evening, Ethan came home from his new job welding steel frames for high-rise developments with dust in his hair and the smell of hot metal on his clothes. Sarah had cooked a simple supper: roast chicken, potatoes, green beans from the market. They ate at the tiny table by the window, candles flickering between them. "To new beginnings," Ethan said, raising his glass of cheap red wine. "To us," Sarah replied. They kissed across the table, tasting salt and promise. Life in London settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and right. Ethan worked long shifts but came home every night to Sarah waiting with a smile and a hot meal. She started as a nursery teacher in a Montessori school near Clissold Park 3 mornings a week to begin with. The children adored her gentle voice and the way she read stories with theatrical flair. In the afternoons, she tended the little balcony garden she was coaxing into life: herbs, geraniums, a single climbing rose. They called each other by first names only when they were alone. In public, they were simply Sarah and Ethan, a couple who had met through mutual friends, fallen in love quickly, and decided to build a life together. No one asked for more detail. London, with its millions of stories, had no time for theirs. 6 weeks after the move, Sarah felt the first faint flutter low in her belly. She bought a test from the chemist on Church Street, peed on the stick in the tiny bathroom, and waited. 2 pink lines appeared almost instantly. She did not tell Ethan right away. Instead, she cooked his favorite spaghetti carbonara and waited until they were curled on the sofa afterward, his head in her lap. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. Ethan went very still. Then he sat up slowly, eyes wide. "Really?" She nodded, tears already gathering. 8 weeks, the doctor said. He pulled her into his arms so tightly she laughed through her tears. "I am going to be a dad," he whispered, voice cracking. "We're going to have a baby." They cried together, laughed together, made love carefully and tenderly that night, as if the new life inside her were already something sacred. The months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, baby clothes bought from charity shops, and late-night conversations about names. Sarah's bump grew steadily. Ethan's hands became protective, always resting on the small of her back when they walked, or cradling her belly when they lay in bed. In early spring, when the cherry trees along the park were in full blossom, they married at Islington Town Hall. No guests, no fuss, just the 2 of them in their best clothes, a simple gold band each, and a registrar who smiled when Ethan's voice shook on "I do." Afterward, they walked hand in hand through the park, petals drifting around them like confetti. Sarah wore a pale blue dress that skimmed her swollen belly. Ethan wore a dark suit and could not stop grinning. "Mrs. Harper," he said, testing the name. "Mr. Bennett Harper," she teased back. "We are official now." That summer their son was born on a warm July morning in the Homerton University Hospital. He arrived after a long but calm labor, dark-haired and perfect, weighing just over 7 pounds. They named him Noah Simple, strong new. The first time Ethan held him, tears streamed down his face unchecked. "Look at him," he whispered. "He has got your eyes." Sarah, exhausted and glowing, reached up to touch Noah's tiny fist. "And your nose." They brought Noah home to the flat filled with sunlight. Sarah quit teaching to care for him full-time. Ethan worked overtime whenever he could. Money was tight, but never desperate. They were careful, frugal, content. Nights were sleepless, days chaotic, yet every moment felt like a gift. Noah's first smile was for Sarah. His first laugh was for Ethan. They took him to the park in the pram, watched him sleep between them, marveled at how quickly he grew. One evening in late autumn, when Noah was 4 months old, they sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights come on. Sarah leaned against Ethan's shoulder, their son asleep in the crook of his arm. "Do you ever think about the village?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but I do not miss it. Not like this." Sarah tilted her face up to kiss him. "Me neither. This is home now." He kissed her back, slow and deep. "We made it," he said against her lips. "We did." And in the quiet hum of the city below them, with their son breathing softly between them, they knew that whatever shadows the past still held, the future was theirs, bright, hard-won, and entirely their own.